You see the red lettering above the word greeting of the gospel. It says, stand in body or in spirit. With this gospel, I will let you choose which you would rather do. It's a big one. Yeah, I'm here for a while, folks, so get the popcorn going. The Holy Gospel according to John. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. And Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. So then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. And Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and to Mary and to console them about their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. And they followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord. This is intermission. Restrooms are to the back. Cocktails will be reserved after worship. Rabbi Edwin Friedman of Family Systems Theory notoriety would have a heyday with this gospel. What is it then that we are to make of this incredibly detailed, family-oriented story? Oh, before we get too far into that, I want to tell you another story. A story written by Brian Doyle in his book, A Shimmer of Something, Lean Stories of Spiritual Substance. And this story is called The Second Letter Lazarus Wrote to His Sisters. Brian writes, "Beloveds, I think we aren't quite communicating clearly here. What I said was that I think there are two sides to every miracle. And while I am thrilled to be alive and not moldering in the grave, and I have written any number of letters of gratitude to himself, it was inarguably embarrassing to be stripped of the grave clothes with which I was bound hand and foot, and to stand there stark naked, discombobulated, after being called forth by a loud voice. Nor was my skin in what you would call the pink of condition. Nor had I eaten for 4 days, but there was suddenly, there I was on display. You would be rattled too, I know you would. Both of you. Loose him and let him go, he says, and everyone oohs and ahs. But you know, what then? You remember what happened next? He moves all the way down the hill, and everyone follows him, the fastest sprinting to the front to see what will happen next. some vendors packing their foods and wares, moving as fast as they can to catch the next miracle. But there I am, naked as a jaybird and smelling to high heaven, or as my colleague Maynard said on Tuesday, he stinketh. Read your King James. End of sidebar. Famished, stunned, reborn, in debt, confused, and utterly alone. Now, I cast no aspersions when I remark that you both followed him. I would have too, had I been capable, and now that I am healthy, I will follow him to the second end of my days. But do allow me simply to note that while it surely was the most memorable day of my entire life, it also certainly was not the most comfortable, nor was it easy, or even, dare I say, the best. To me, the day I was married was the best day. The day my 3 children arrived was the best of days. So I can say, even as I am the most thankful man who ever was, that I regret, in some small way, that for many centuries hence, I will not be Eleazar, a decent man, beloved by his many friends, a good father, a patient husband, noted for his kindness and wit, but only as Lazarus, who was, by the Christ, returned from the dead. Now, if such be the small price of this new life in which I am at home, again in the arms of those I love, among whom I count the 2 of you, so be it. But I do think that you, among all women in the world, would understand that miracles breed ripples that do not cease. Here endeth the story. This is such a big story that it's hard to kind of pick a piece. But as I kind of stood back this week and looked at this text that I've heard over and over and over again for my some 40 years in ministry, something came alive to me. That we kind of need to get behind the profound grief in this story, to get behind the veil of tears that are shed in this story, and to see this story as one of profound relationships, of deep, enduring, lasting love. The Bethany family, along with the unnamed disciple whom Jesus loved in the second half of this gospel, are the only individuals in John whom Jesus is specifically said to have loved. Jesus loves his own, yes. And the Son loves the Father, yes. And Jesus loves Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. So this story is also about what it means to be in relationship with one another and with Jesus, and what it means to love him and to be loved by him. And love in John's gospel is inextricably linked to death. John writes later, "No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Or, "For God so loved the world that God gave." You're good readers, y'all. And that is also very, very true in this story. The story of this family of Bethany. The relationship with Jesus does not mean that bad things will not happen. No. And he does not prevent Lazarus from dying. But he is ultimately so present to them. And God is glorified even in that something that is going on feels initially unredeemably painful. And this beloved family is an essential part of God's glory. The narrative also shows us a community that comes together 2 miles of walking to care for Lazarus' family, to comfort them in their grief. And Jesus responds by acknowledging the sister's grief, and he weeps, revealing his grief, his compassion. And Jesus also acts. He reassures Martha by saying, "I am the resurrection and the life," a response that Martha perceives as a future answer. And even the one who is himself the resurrection and the life is deeply unsettled by the human grief and death with which he experiences. In the final scene, the sisters lead Jesus to the tomb, and after voicing sensible concern, which reveal that they cannot conceive of what is about to happen, they remove the stone. And Jesus calls Lazarus, and of course, Lazarus comes out. But what happens next? And although what happens next is not included in the story for today, it is an essential part of understanding this whole passage. Although some of the bystanders believe, others go and report Jesus to the authorities. And it is on this basis that the authorities decide definitively to put Jesus to death. It wasn't the clearing of the temple as it was in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In John, this was the defining moment leading to Jesus' death. This is where all of the events of the cross begin, in a family grieving and in tears, and one who is lovingly life-giving himself is now sentenced to death. Those are the ripples that follow in the story. Because being in relationship with Jesus means facing death and grief with him, and learning that still, in spite of death and the fact that he stinketh, and the dryness and the finality of the door at the entrance to the tombs of our hopes, he can still be said to be life. And nothing is ever so dead that it keeps him from being that in himself and for us. And in John, that life is not only some future hope that's going to happen down the road someplace. No, that abundant life is here and now and in our hands if we will take it, sometimes if we don't want it. So as we approach this coming Holy Week, having Jesus at our tombs also means that we must meet and follow him to his. We must endure the silence of his Saturday, even as we endure the silences of our own. But we endure them, knowing already that Sunday will surely come. And when we are walking in the garden of our grief in tears, we will be met with the tears and the grief in new life and in love. And so it is that we head into these next 2 weeks to a table, to a cross, and to an empty tomb where there will be more ripples that do not cease. Blessings on the journey.